I am Suzanne, 32 years old. For 6 years, I worked two jobs, saving every penny, until I had $75,000 in my account. My mom and I were always close until she married Harold. When I discovered my bank account completely emptied, I was devastated. The betrayal cut deep when I learned they used my hard-earned money to buy an apartment for my stepsister Jessica. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below, hit like and subscribe to see how I got justice and changed my family forever. Growing up, it was just my mom and me against the world. We lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment in Chicago, where she worked long hours as a nurse to provide for us. Despite her exhaustion, she always made time to help with my homework, attend my school events, and create special moments together. Our Saturday morning pancake tradition was sacred, even when money was tight. My father left when I was 3, and we rarely heard from him. He sent birthday cards sporadically with small amounts of cash, but never paid consistent child support. Mom never spoke ill of him, simply saying he wasn't ready for the responsibility of parenthood. As I grew older, I appreciated her grace in handling such a difficult situation. By the time I reached high school, Mom and I had developed an unbreakable bond. We told each other everything and made all major decisions together. She supported my passion for mathematics and encouraged me when I decided to pursue accounting in college. We dreamed of the day when financial struggles would be behind us. Everything changed when I was 18 during my senior year of high school. Mom met Harold Williams at the hospital where she worked. He was a pharmaceutical sales representative who frequently visited her department. At 52, he was 15 years older than Mom, but she seemed happier than I had seen her in years. Harold was charming and financially stable, something we weren't accustomed to. He owned a beautiful 4-bedroom house in the suburbs and drove a luxury car. On their third date, he brought Mom home with a diamond bracelet that probably cost more than our monthly rent. I was initially happy for her, even if the sudden appearance of expensive gifts seemed a bit much. 3 months into their relationship, Harold invited us to dinner to meet his 16-year-old daughter, Jessica. She lived primarily with her mother, but stayed with Harold every other weekend. Jessica seemed nice enough, if a bit spoiled. She wore designer clothes and spent most of the evening texting on her latest model smartphone. When Mom and Harold announced their engagement after dating for only 6 months, I had reservations, but kept them to myself. Mom deserved happiness, and who was I to stand in the way they married in a lavish ceremony that Harold insisted on paying for entirely? 2 weeks later, we moved into his suburban home. I had planned to live in the college dorms, but Harold suggested I stay home to save money. It made financial sense, so I agreed. The commute to my university was manageable, and I could put the housing money toward tuition instead. Mom seemed relieved, probably not wanting to be alone in a new marriage with a stepdaughter who visited regularly. The first few months of our blended family went relatively smoothly. Harold was generous with household expenses, and Mom no longer had to work overtime shifts. I focused on my studies and tried to build a relationship with Jessica during her visits. We would never be close friends given our different interests and personalities, but I made an effort to be a good stepsister. Around the 6-month mark, I began noticing subtle changes in the family dynamic. When Jessica visited, Harold made elaborate meals and planned special outings. For the rest of us, meals were simple and unplanned. Mom brushed off my observations, saying I was being oversensitive. As time passed, the disparities became more obvious. Jessica received a brand new car for her 17th birthday, while Mom suggested I continue using public transportation to save money. When I made the dean's list, Harold merely nodded. But when Jessica brought home a B-plus average, he took the entire family to an expensive restaurant to celebrate. More concerning was the change in my mom. She began dressing differently, wearing more makeup, and seeming anxious about keeping the house perfect before Harold returned from work trips. The warm, confident woman who raised me was transforming into someone who constantly sought approval. Harold controlled the family finances completely. He gave Mom an allowance for household expenses and questioned any purchases that weren't pre-approved. When Mom got a small raise at work, Harold suggested she reduce her hours instead of enjoying the extra income. Gradually, she transitioned to part-time work, becoming even more financially dependent on him. During my sophomore year, I overheard an argument about money. Harold was upset about a lunch Mom had bought for us without consulting him first. His voice was cold and dismissive as he reminded her that he was the financial decision maker in the household. Mom apologized repeatedly, her voice small and afraid. That night, lying in bed, I felt a growing sense of unease about our living situation. But with 2 more years of college ahead and limited options, I convinced myself things would improve. Mom seemed happy in most ways, and perhaps I was overreacting to normal step-family adjustments. Looking back, I should have trusted my instincts about Harold from the beginning. After graduating with my accounting degree, I faced the harsh reality of entry-level salaries. My first job at a small firm paid only $37,000 annually, barely enough to cover basic expenses in Chicago. Still living at home, I created a strict budget to maximize savings, despite my modest income. The day I received my first paycheck, I went directly to my bank and opened a separate savings account. I calculated that by living at home and dedicating 80% of my income to savings, I could build a substantial nest egg within a few years. My goal was financial independence and eventually owning my own place. Since I was still building credit, I asked Mom to be a secondary account holder in case of emergencies. She had always been financially responsible, and I trusted her completely. We visited the bank together, signed the paperwork, and I explained that this account was strictly for my future home purchase. Mom seemed proud of my financial discipline. She told me how mature I was being and promised to respect the purpose of the account. We hugged in the bank parking lot and she said, "You're going to have your own place before you know it, sweetheart." I believed her. My daily routine became grueling but purposeful. I woke at 5:30 each morning to beat traffic, worked 9 hours at the firm, then drove to my side gig as a bookkeeper for 3 small businesses. Most nights I returned home after 10, exhausted but satisfied, watching my savings grow. The physical toll was evident. I lost weight, developed persistent dark circles under my eyes, and caught every cold that circulated through the office. Mom occasionally expressed concern about my schedule, but Harold would interject with comments like "hard work never killed anyone," or "this is what it takes to get ahead." His words only fueled my determination to become financially independent from their household. Every $1,000 milestone in my savings account became a personal celebration. I would show Mom my banking app, and initially she shared my excitement. We would sit at the kitchen table after Harold went to bed, whispering about the type of place I might buy and how I would decorate it. These moments reminded me of our closeness before Harold. By the end of my first year of working, I had saved nearly $20,000. Mom seemed impressed, but increasingly distracted during our financial discussions. When I reached $30,000 after 18 months, her reaction was notably subdued. She glanced toward the stairs, as if worried Harold might overhear us talking about money. Meanwhile, Jessica had started college at an expensive private university. Harold paid her tuition in full, bought her a newer car for campus, and gave her a generous monthly allowance. In contrast, I was still paying off student loans for my state university education, driving my old high school car, and counting every penny. The disparity in treatment became impossible to ignore. During holiday gatherings, Harold would boast about Jessica's college experience, her sorority, and the opportunities he was providing her. When relatives asked about my job, he would quickly change the subject or make comments like, "Suzanne is still finding her way," or "accounting isn't exactly a glamorous field." Despite these discouragements, I remained focused on my goal. I researched condominiums in Chicago neighborhoods that might be within my reach. I attended first-time homebuyer workshops and calculated exactly how much I would need for a down payment, closing costs, and a small renovation budget. My target was $75,000, which would allow me to buy a modest one-bedroom condo in a decent area. The sacrifices were significant. I missed friends' weddings because I couldn't afford gifts and travel expenses. I worked through holidays to earn extra pay. My healthcare needs were often postponed because of high deductibles. Dating became non-existent as I had neither time nor money to invest in relationships. Every decision was filtered through one question: will this bring me closer to financial independence? 5 years into my aggressive saving plan, I received a promotion at the firm. My salary increased to $52,000, allowing me to accelerate my savings even more. I updated my budget and calculated that I could reach my $75,000 goal within the next year if I maintained my discipline. During this period, Mom and I grew increasingly distant. She rarely asked about my savings progress anymore, and when I voluntarily shared updates, she would nod absently or change the subject. I attributed her disinterest to being absorbed in her marriage and Harold's frequent demands for her attention. 6 years after starting my savings journey, I finally reached my goal of $75,000. The number glowed on my banking app screen, representing thousands of hours of hard work and sacrifice. I felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with anticipation for the next chapter of my life. That evening, I announced my achievement at dinner. I couldn't contain my excitement and blurted out, "I did it. $75,000 saved. I can finally start looking for my own place." Harold looked up from his meal with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "How much did you say you've saved? Where exactly do you keep that money?" The questions felt invasive, but I was too happy to recognize the warning signs. Mom quickly arranged a celebration dinner that weekend. She prepared my favorite foods and even bought a small cake that said congratulations. During dessert, Harold asked seemingly casual questions about my bank, whether I used online banking, and if I had considered investment options instead of just savings. Looking back, I should have recognized his unusual interest in my financial details. But in my naive happiness, I openly shared information about my account, even mentioning that Mom was a secondary account holder for emergencies. Harold nodded thoughtfully, and I mistook his calculating expression for genuine interest in my achievement. 2 weeks after reaching my savings goal, I contracted a severe case of influenza that knocked me completely off my feet. My temperature spiked to 104 degrees, and Mom insisted on taking me to the emergency room. The doctor diagnosed me with influenza A and ordered complete bed rest for at least 10 days. The illness hit me harder than expected. Between high fevers, body aches, and extreme fatigue, I barely left my bed for 2 weeks. Mom brought meals to my room and checked on me frequently, showing glimpses of her old nurturing self. During this time, checking my bank accounts or emails was the furthest thing from my mind. As I began recovering, I overheard a conversation between Mom and Harold in the hallway outside my room. Mom said something about Jessica finally finding a nice place in Lakeview, an upscale neighborhood I had always dreamed of living in but knew was well beyond my budget. Harold hushed her quickly, saying, "Not now, Suzanne might hear you." Their behavior grew increasingly strange as I regained my strength. When I mentioned potentially starting my condo search the following month, Mom became visibly uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact and changing the subject. Harold would suddenly find reasons to leave the room whenever I brought up my savings or future plans. One evening during dinner, Harold announced that he and Mom would be taking Jessica apartment shopping that weekend. Mom stared at her plate, pushing food around without eating. When I asked casual questions about Jessica's budget and what neighborhoods they were considering, Harold answered vaguely about wanting to invest in her future, while Mom remained silent. The next day, while retrieving the mail, I noticed something odd. The bank statement I was expecting wasn't there. I typically received monthly paper statements as a backup to my online records, but it was missing from the usual mail pile. When I mentioned this to Mom, she became flustered and suggested it might have been delayed or misdelivered. Increasingly concerned, I called my bank to inquire about the missing statement. The customer service representative informed me that my statements had been switched to electronic delivery 3 weeks earlier. When I explained that I hadn't authorized this change, she verified that the request had come through my online account and that notification emails had been sent to confirm the change. I immediately checked my email only to discover that I couldn't log in. The password had been changed. Using the account recovery option, I was alarmed to see that the recovery email had been changed to one I didn't recognize. A cold feeling settled in my stomach as I realized someone had deliberately taken steps to prevent me from accessing my account information. Around the house, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. I would enter rooms to find Mom and Harold in whispered conversation that abruptly stopped when I appeared. Jessica began visiting more frequently, unusually excited about something she refused to share with me. She made cryptic comments about getting everything she deserved and how her life was finally coming together. One afternoon, I overheard Jessica on the phone, describing a gorgeous hardwood floor and granite countertops in a sun-drenched space with a view of the lake. My heart raced as I realized she was describing an apartment that sounded far more luxurious than what a college student could typically afford. Later that week, Harold came home with several large bags from expensive furniture stores. Jessica squealed with delight as he told her these were just the beginning of furnishings for her new beginnings. Mom stood in the background, her face a mask of conflicted emotions as she watched their excitement. That night, I could barely sleep. Anxiety gnawed at me as connections began forming in my mind. The timing of my illness, the missing bank statement, the changed email password, Jessica's expensive apartment, Harold's furniture purchases, and my family's strange behavior all pointed to a conclusion I wasn't ready to accept. The next morning, instead of going to work, I called in sick and waited until everyone had left the house. With shaking hands, I searched Harold's home office, looking for any information about Jessica's apartment. I found nothing concrete, but noticed several bank statements were missing from his usually meticulous files. Sleep deprived and increasingly paranoid, I spent the next few days closely observing my family while pretending everything was normal. I noticed Mom avoiding being alone with me, Harold making unusual phone calls from his car rather than in the house, and Jessica taking numerous photos of furniture and decor items she claimed were for a class project. The suspicion eating away at me demanded action, but part of me still couldn't believe my own mother would betray me so completely. I needed proof before making accusations that could permanently damage our relationship. Little did I know how much worse the reality would be than even my darkest suspicions. 2 weeks after my illness during my lunch break, I drove straight to my bank. My hands trembled as I parked the car, anxiety mounting with each step toward the entrance. I needed to see my account information in person, to prove my growing fears were just paranoia. I approached the teller with my identification ready. "Good afternoon. I'd like to check my account balance and get a statement of recent transactions, please." My voice sounded calmer than I felt. The teller tapped on her computer, then looked up with a sympathetic smile. "Ms. Adams, your current balance is $1,243.67. Would you like a printed statement of your recent transactions?" My legs nearly gave out. That couldn't be right. Just last month, I had over $75,000. There must be some mistake. I managed to whisper, "Yes, please. A statement of all transactions from the past month." The paper she handed me confirmed my worst nightmare. Multiple large withdrawals had drained my account, leaving behind barely 1% of my savings. The transactions had occurred during my illness, spaced out over several days, possibly to avoid triggering fraud alerts. "I need to speak with a manager immediately," I said, my voice rising with panic. "Someone has stolen my money." In the manager's office, I learned the devastating truth. The withdrawals had been authorized by the secondary account holder, my mother. Each transaction included her identification verification and signature. The manager showed me copies of the withdrawal slips, and there was no mistaking Mom's handwriting. "Can you tell me when these withdrawals were made and where the money went?" I asked, still hoping for some explanation that didn't involve deliberate theft. The manager reviewed the records. The first withdrawal was on March 10th. 3 more followed on the 12th, 15th, and 17th. She hesitated, then continued. The funds were transferred to another account, and then a cashier's check was issued. "I can't disclose the recipient's information, but I can confirm the transfers were completed properly according to our procedures." March 10th was the day after I was admitted to the emergency room with influenza. While I lay feverish in bed, my mother had begun systematically draining my life savings. The dates of the other withdrawals coincided exactly with Jessica's apartment hunting timeline. I left the bank in a daze, driving home on autopilot. It was only 2 o'clock, and no one should have been home yet. But as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Harold's car, Mom's car, and an unfamiliar luxury SUV that I would later learn belonged to a real estate agent. Walking quietly through the front door, I heard the sound of champagne corks popping and celebratory voices coming from the kitchen. I moved silently down the hallway, stopping just short of the kitchen entrance. "The apartment is absolutely perfect for Jessica," a woman's voice I didn't recognize said enthusiastically. "Lakeview is such a desirable neighborhood, especially for a young professional starting out." Harold laughed. "Nothing but the best for my princess." She deserves this fresh start, the real estate agent continued. And completing the purchase so quickly was remarkable. Cash buyers always have the advantage. I held my breath as Mom spoke next, her voice uncharacteristically timid. What about Suzanne? Are you sure she'll never need to know about this? Harold's tone turned dismissive. She's fine living here. Besides, she's so busy with her job she barely notices what's happening around her anyway. Jessica needs this apartment for her career opportunities. Suzanne can keep saving if she wants her own place so badly. I couldn't listen anymore. I stepped into the kitchen doorway, still clutching the bank statement. The room fell silent as 4 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Mom's face drained of color. Harold froze mid-sip of champagne. Jessica looked annoyed at the interruption, and the real estate agent smiled professionally, unaware of the bomb about to detonate. Suzanne, you're home early? Mom stammered, her eyes darting to the bank statement in my hand. Yes, I just came from the bank. I held up the statement. Would anyone like to explain why my savings account has been emptied? The real estate agent sensed the tension and quickly gathered her papers. I should be going. Jessica, congratulations again on your beautiful new apartment. Just sign those final papers by Friday. She hurried past me, leaving the family in stunned silence. Once the front door closed, I turned back to my family. My voice shook with rage and betrayal. $74,000. 6 years of my life. Every extra shift, every weekend, every holiday I worked instead of spent with friends. You stole it all. Mom stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes. Sweetheart, we can explain. It's not what you think. Harold cut her off, his voice cold and calculating. Your mother and I made a family decision. Jessica needed an apartment in a good neighborhood for her new job. As part of this family, you should be happy to contribute. I stared at him in disbelief, then turned to my mother. You stole from me, your own daughter. Mom wrung her hands. We were going to tell you. Eventually, when the time was right. We're family, Suzanne. We needed it more than you did. You live here rent-free, Harold interjected. This is just repayment for all we've provided you. Jessica smirked. You don't even need an apartment, Suzanne. You can keep living here.
I have a career that requires me to live in the city. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I could barely breathe. They had waited until I was sick, helpless in bed to steal everything I'd worked for. They had celebrated their theft while I remained ignorant.
And now they stood before me, not apologetic, but defensive, as if I was the unreasonable one. I want every dollar back, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. Every single penny with interest by the end of the month, or I will press charges for theft and fraud. Against all of you. You wouldn't dare. Harold scoffed. We're family. Family doesn't steal from each other, I replied. You have 30 days. Then let the police and the bank fraud department decide what happens next. I turned and walked out, tears streaming down my face, my entire future stolen by the people I had trusted most in the world. The week following my discovery was filled with relentless psychological warfare, as my family tried every manipulation tactic possible to make me back down. They operated as a united front, each playing a designated role in their attempt to normalize their betrayal. Mom was assigned the emotional manipulator role. She would corner me in the kitchen early mornings, eyes red from crying, voice quavering as she pleaded, How can you threaten your own mother with legal action? After everything I've sacrificed for you growing up, we raised you to understand that family helps family. When tears didn't work, she escalated to health concerns. The stress you're causing could send me back into depression, Suzanne. Is that what you want? For me to end up hospitalized because my own daughter is treating me like a criminal? Harold took a more aggressive approach, alternating between intimidation and condescension. During dinner, he would casually mention, You know, most landlords require 30 days notice before eviction. I wonder what would happen if you suddenly had to find an apartment with no savings and an entry-level salary. Other times, he would adopt a paternalistic tone, speaking slowly, as if explaining something to a child. This is how the real world works, Suzanne. Resources in a family get allocated where they're most needed. Jessica is starting her career and needs appropriate housing in a professional neighborhood. Your contribution is just part of being in a family. Jessica was perhaps the most infuriating. She would parade around the house describing features of her new apartment while shooting me triumphant glances. "The view from the 12th floor is absolutely breathtaking," she would say within my earshot. "And the doorman remembers my name already. It's so nice to be treated like someone important." When confronted directly, she would shrug and say, "It's not my fault they decided to use your money. Take it up with them." Though she didn't hesitate to add, "But the apartment is legally mine now, so good luck getting it back." The coordinated gaslighting escalated when Harold involved his sister, my step-aunt Karen. She called under the pretense of checking in, then launched into a prepared speech. "Suzanne, everyone makes financial mistakes when they're young. Your mom feels terrible about the misunderstanding, but threatening legal action is going too far. You need to forgive and forget before this tears the family apart." "Misunderstanding," I responded incredulously. "They emptied my account while I was sick in bed and bought Jessica an apartment with my money. That's not a misunderstanding, it's theft." "Family helps family," Karen repeated Harold's mantra. "Besides, the money is gone now. They put down a non-refundable deposit and signed contracts. Pursuing this will only hurt everyone, including you." Each day brought new tactics. Harold left brochures about family therapy on my bed. Mom would reminisce about my childhood, pulling out photo albums and reminding me how she'd always been there for me. Jessica started inviting me to see the apartment, suggesting we could be friends if I just accepted the situation. I maintained a resolute silence, communicating only about my deadline for returning the money. Inside, however, I was crumbling. Each night alone in my room, I would sob silently into my pillow, mourning not just the loss of my savings, but the destruction of my relationship with Mom. One evening, Harold cornered me in the kitchen. "Look, the apartment costs more than what was in your account anyway. We're paying the difference. You should be grateful we're not asking you to contribute more to give your sister a good start in life." "Stepsister," I corrected coldly. "And the fact that it costs more than you stole doesn't make the theft any less criminal." His face hardened. "You always were ungrateful. Living under my roof for years, eating my food, using my utilities, and now you're too selfish to help family when needed." I said nothing, but later that night I slipped into Harold's home office. I needed to understand exactly what they had done with my money. Searching through his files, I found a folder labeled Jessica's apartment with legal documents inside. The purchase agreement listed Jessica as the sole owner with a purchase price of $850,000. The down payment was exactly $74,000, my entire savings. The discovery deepened my sense of betrayal. They hadn't just borrowed the money or used it as part of a larger family expense. They had deliberately taken everything I had and gifted it to Jessica in the form of property ownership that would benefit her for years to come. The next day, I met with a lawyer friend for lunch, careful to meet far from home or work. After explaining my situation, she confirmed my suspicions about the legal ramifications. "This is clear-cut fraud and theft, Suzanne," she explained. "Your mother abused her position as secondary account holder. The fact that they did this while you were ill makes it worse, not better. You have every right to pursue criminal charges, civil damages, or both." As the deadline approached, I faced an agonizing internal struggle. I loved my mother despite her betrayal. Could I really follow through with legal action against her? Would sending my own mother to jail help me recover emotionally or financially? And yet, how could I let such a deliberate, callous theft go unpunished? With 1 week remaining before my deadline, I made my decision. I would give them one last chance to make things right, not just financially, but by acknowledging the severity of their actions and the damage done to our relationship. What happened next would determine whether there was any path forward for us as a family. With the deadline approaching, I knew I needed more than emotional appeals to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I had to think strategically and use every skill at my disposal. My accounting background had taught me to follow money trails, document everything, and build cases methodically. It was time to apply those principles to my own situation. First, I purchased a small digital recorder and began documenting conversations about the theft. Illinois is a two-party consent state for recordings, so I couldn't secretly record others, but I could openly place my phone on the table during discussions and announce I was recording for my records. The family objected initially, but I held firm, saying if we're just having an honest family discussion about a misunderstanding, there's no reason not to document it. This simple act changed the dynamic dramatically. With their words being recorded, they became more cautious, less aggressive in their manipulations, and occasionally slipped into admitting what had actually occurred. During one recorded conversation, Mom accidentally confirmed the premeditation. "We did wait until you were sick because we knew you'd try to stop us if you were well." Harold immediately interrupted her, but the admission was captured clearly. Meanwhile, I gathered extensive documentation from the bank. I requested copies of all withdrawal slips, transfer authorizations, and account access logs. The bank provided records showing the exact times my mother had accessed the account, matching them perfectly, with days I was bedridden with fever. The most damning evidence came from transaction receipts, showing my mother had transferred the money first to a joint account she shared with Harold, and then to the real estate company handling Jessica's apartment purchase. The paper trail was unambiguous, showing a clear path from my savings directly to Jessica's property. Using my accounting software skills, I created a detailed financial report, tracking every dollar from my original deposits through years of savings to the final withdrawals and property purchase. The document was professional, meticulous, and would be devastating in court. While gathering financial evidence, I discovered something unexpected in the family computer browser history. Harold had searched for legal information about unauthorized account access and potential defenses against bank fraud charges in the days before they began withdrawing my money. This proved not only premeditation, but awareness that their actions were criminal. More disturbing was what I found when I began examining Harold's business documents that he'd carelessly left accessible on the family computer. As I reviewed spreadsheets and tax documents, I noticed discrepancies between reported income on tax forms and actual business revenue. Harold had been systematically underreporting income for years, potentially committing tax fraud. This discovery gave me leverage, but I wanted to understand my mom's role more clearly. Was she a willing participant or another of Harold's victims? I arranged to meet her alone, telling her I was willing to discuss a compromise if we could speak privately. We met at a coffee shop far from home where she wouldn't feel Harold's influence. I began gently, "Mom, I need to understand. This isn't like you. Why would you steal from your own daughter?" Her composure cracked immediately. "Harold said it wasn't stealing because we are family," she whispered, tears forming. "He said Jessica deserved a good start and that you were being selfish by not helping. Did you believe that I asked, keeping my voice calm despite my anger?" She stared into her coffee. At first, no, but Harold can be very convincing. He kept saying it day after day how Jessica needed this opportunity, how you were ungrateful for all we'd done for you, how family resources should be shared. Eventually, I started wondering if he was right. I pressed further. "And when did you decide to take the money while I was sick?" She flinched. "That was Harold's idea. He said it would be easier if you discovered it after everything was finalized, that you'd be angry at first, but would eventually understand it was for the greater good of the family." As our conversation continued, a clearer picture emerged. Harold had manipulated Mom for years, isolating her, controlling their finances, and gradually reshaping her values to match his. The theft of my savings wasn't the first time he'd used her to further his goals, just the most extreme example. What would happen if I went to the police? I asked directly. Her face paled. Harold said he'd make sure I took all the blame, that since my name is on the withdrawals, he could claim he knew nothing about it. He said he'd divorce me and leave me with nothing if I didn't support his version of events. The manipulation was worse than I'd imagined. My mother was both perpetrator and victim, a realization that complicated my plans for justice. Armed with evidence about the theft and Harold's questionable business practices, I formulated a multi-pronged strategy. First, I anonymously reported Harold's potential tax evasion to the IRS, providing enough details to trigger an audit without revealing my identity. Next, I filed a formal police report about the theft, bringing my meticulously organized evidence. I was careful to emphasize my mother's role as potentially coerced, focusing instead on Harold's orchestration of the scheme. Finally, I confronted Jessica directly, laying out the legal consequences she faced as the beneficiary of stolen funds. I don't care about family politics, I told her coldly. But I do care about the $74,000 that was taken from me to buy you an apartment. As the beneficiary of stolen money, you're legally vulnerable. The property could be seized and you'll have a fraud case following you for years. Her normally confident demeanor crumbled. But I didn't steal anything. I just accepted the apartment. You accepted property bought with stolen money, I corrected her. And you've been flaunting it in my face for weeks, fully aware of where the down payment came from. What do you want? She asked, fear replacing her usual smugness. I want the apartment transferred to my name, I said simply. It's legally purchased with my money, so it should be mine. Otherwise, I'll let the police handle it, and we can all watch your perfect future crumble under a fraud investigation. Jessica panicked exactly as Id anticipated. Harold has been moving money around in weird ways for years, she blurted out. He made Mom sign things she didn't understand. He has accounts no one knows about. This confirmation of Harold's financial improprieties was the final piece I needed. The family that had united to steal from me was now fracturing under pressure, each person scrambling to protect themselves. Their coordinated deception was unraveling, and with it their power over me and my future. The consequences of my strategic actions unfolded rapidly over the next few weeks. 2 days after my anonymous tip, Harold received notification of an IRS audit. The color drained from his face as he read the letter at the breakfast table, his hands trembling slightly. Without saying a word, he retreated to his office and locked the door, spending hours making frantic phone calls. Meanwhile, the police investigation into the theft from my account progressed quickly thanks to the comprehensive evidence I had provided. A detective called to inform me they were treating the case as grand theft and fraud, with Harold as the primary suspect, despite my mother's name on the withdrawal slips. We have evidence suggesting coercion and a pattern of financial control, the detective explained. Your documentation of the timeline and money transfers has been extremely helpful in building the case. Jessica's panic continued to grow. After our confrontation, she began avoiding Harold staying with friends and ignoring his calls. When a police officer contacted her for questioning about the apartment purchase, her self-preservation instinct took over completely. She called me in tears, agreeing to surrender ownership of the apartment. I have a lawyer drafting paperwork to transfer the deed to you, she said, her voice unsteady. Just please tell them I didn't know the money was stolen. I can't have this on my record before I even start my career. The most dramatic development came when Harold discovered Jessica was cooperating with me. He exploded in rage, calling her ungrateful and threatening to cut her off financially. Their screaming match in the living room revealed the conditional nature of his parental love, shocking even my mother, who had defended him for years. As Harold became increasingly cornered, his treatment of Mom worsened. He blamed her for leaving evidence trails and for raising a daughter who would turn against family. One evening, after a particularly vicious verbal attack, I found Mom crying in the laundry room, a bruise forming on her arm where Harold had grabbed her. That's enough, I said gently, helping her to her feet. Pack some essentials. You're coming with me. We checked into a hotel that night, and the next morning Mom filed for both a restraining order and legal separation from Harold. Her hands shook as she completed the paperwork, but determination had replaced the fear in her eyes. I can't believe I let him control me for so long, she whispered as we left the courthouse. Or that I betrayed you for him. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, Suzanne. But I'm so sorry. The apology was a beginning, but trust would take much longer to rebuild. I maintained emotional distance, focusing instead on the practical aspects of our situation. I found Mom a small apartment of her own and helped her begin the process of financial independence from Harold. 2 weeks after our hotel escape, Jessica's lawyer completed the property transfer, making me the legal owner of the Lakeview apartment. The irony wasn't lost on me that after years of saving for a modest one-bedroom condo, I now owned a luxury apartment in one of Chicago's most desirable neighborhoods, all because of my family's betrayal. Harold was facing multiple legal problems by this point. The IRS audit had expanded into a full investigation of his business practices. The police were building a case against him for the theft of my savings. And his lawyer had informed him that with the restraining order and evidence of financial coercion, he'd likely lose significantly in the divorce settlement. His carefully constructed facade of success and control was crumbling, revealing the manipulative, dishonest man beneath. Former business associates distanced themselves. Family friends took Mom's side after learning the truth. And even Jessica ultimately chose to protect herself rather than remain loyal to him. Standing in the empty Lakeview apartment, staring out at the lakeview that had been purchased with my stolen savings, I felt strangely hollow. The property was mine now legally and morally, but it was tainted by the betrayal that had acquired it. After careful consideration, I decided to sell it, rather than live there surrounded by those memories. The apartment sold quickly in the hot Chicago market, bringing in $900,000. After paying off the mortgage Harold and Mom had taken out, I was left with significantly more than my original savings. I decided to use the money in a way that would help heal the wounds of the past year. First, I kept enough to buy the modest condo I had originally planned for refusing to let my betrayer's inadvertent upgrade change my lifestyle goals. The rest I divided thoughtfully. I placed a portion in a trust for Mom, ensuring she would have financial stability, regardless of the divorce outcome. This wasn't forgiveness yet, but recognition of her steps toward making amends and freeing herself from Harold's control. I also hired a therapist specializing in family betrayal, committing to weekly sessions to process my complex emotions. The grief of losing my trusted relationship with Mom, the rage toward Harold, and the complicated feelings about Jessica all required professional guidance to navigate. As for Jessica, our relationship remained strained, but shifted from antagonistic to cautiously neutral. She had learned a harsh lesson about her father's conditional love and the consequences of entitlement. While I didn't seek her friendship, I no longer viewed her as an enemy, just another imperfect person finding her way. Harold faced the consequences of his actions through multiple legal channels. The IRS found substantial evidence of tax evasion, resulting in heavy fines and the possibility of criminal charges. The police case regarding my stolen savings moved forward with both financial restitution and potential jail time on the table. His reputation in the business community was shattered, and many of his assets were frozen during investigations. 6 months after discovering the theft, I moved into my new condo, a one-bedroom place in a neighborhood I had researched for years. It was smaller and less luxurious than the Lakeview apartment, but it was truly mine purchased, honestly, and representing the independence I had worked so hard to achieve. Mom and I began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship, starting with carefully boundaried interactions. We would meet for coffee once a week, gradually increasing the time as trust incrementally returned. She continued therapy, working to understand how she had been manipulated into betraying her own daughter and reconstructing her sense of self, separate from Harold's influence. During one of our coffee meetings, nearly a year after the betrayal, Mom reached across the table and tentatively took my hand. "I've been thinking about what you said about family not stealing from each other," she said quietly. "You were right. What we did wasn't family behavior. I can't change the past, but I want you to know I'm learning what healthy family relationships actually look like. Thank you for not giving up on me completely." The road to reconciliation would be long with setbacks and progress in equal measure. There were days I still felt the sharp sting of betrayal, and others where I glimpsed the possibility of a new, healthier relationship with Mom. Jessica remained on the periphery, occasionally reaching out with awkward attempts at connection that I responded to with polite distance. As for Harold, he eventually faced legal consequences for his actions, though the details became less important to me as I focused on rebuilding my life. His power over our family was broken, and the lesson was clear. No amount of manipulation could forever obscure the truth or prevent justice. The experience changed me profoundly. I became more cautious with trust, but also more confident in standing up for myself. I learned that family bonds, while important, must be built on respect and honesty to be meaningful. Most significantly, I discovered my own resilience, surviving a betrayal that once seemed insurmountable and emerging stronger on the other side. Today, I still work as an accountant, but with healthier boundaries around my time and energy. I date occasionally, carefully introducing new people into my life. I maintain a relationship with mom that acknowledges our painful history while allowing for new patterns to develop. We may never recapture the closeness we once had, but we found a way forward based on truth rather than obligation. The greatest lesson from this experience wasn't about money. Though financial independence remains important to me, it was learning that sometimes protecting yourself from those who would harm you, even family, is an act of self-love, and that true forgiveness, when it eventually comes, isn't about forgetting the past, but about preventing it from determining your future. What about you? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who betrayed your trust? How did you balance justice with the possibility of reconciliation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complex family dynamics and finding strength after betrayal. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that protecting your boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for a healthy life.